But while she was on the board, 114 million went to companies, green companies that she had invested in. And during her time on the board, the value of her company, Cycle Capital, tripled. You'll never guess who her lobbyist was. Any guesses? Any guesses who her lobbyist was? Her in-house paid lobbyist for 10 years before he was elected?
Hello, my fellow Canadians. Now, I know a lot of you don't really like politics, and most people try to avoid it at all costs. But sometimes the cost is just too big to avoid. Now, if you haven't been paying attention as of late in the committees, the SDTC scandal is blowing up. We are talking about probably around $800 million that have just disappeared out of the taxpayers' money. So if you're wondering why we are getting some new taxes, carbon taxes, out of the wazoos, have a look at this video.
It does not require the police to go to court to get access to those documents. That owner of that company, that management team, can supply those documents to the police to start the investigation. Why does that matter with regard to this instance? We have a foundation that was set up in 2001 called Sustainable Development Technology Canada with the purpose of providing taxpayer financial assistance to green technology companies before they're commercialized. Since this government has been elected, they've received $1 billion of taxpayer money. And the result of that, and probing by parliamentary committees, is that we found that in 82% of the funding transactions approved by the Board of Directors during a sample period, a 5-year period that the Auditor General looked at, 82% of those transactions were conflicted. So that's a number. What does that mean? According to the Auditor General, that's $330 million of taxpayer money that was given to companies where the board members who voted to give it to that company, those companies, had a conflict of interest. In addition, the Auditor General found that that same board approved another $59 million of projects that they weren't authorized to do. They were outside of the mandate of the foundation that the government and parliament set up. They broke the SDTC contribution agreements, and these directors broke the conflict of interest laws of Canada as public office holders, and they broke the SDTC Act. So how did they break them? What does that act say? Those two acts say. You know what they say? They say that a governor and council appointment, a person appointed by the government entrusted to oversee taxpayer money, is not to personally profit from their work on that committee as a GIC appointment, and neither is their family. Yet that's exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened. And the Auditor General found in a 5-year period where there were 405 transactions approved by the board, the Auditor General sampled 226, so only half of them, and found that 186 of those 226 transactions were conflicted. That's the 82%. That's the $330 million. If the Auditor General looked at all 400 transactions, statistically, that would probably mean the rest are just as conflicted. And that 400 transactions is $832 million of taxpayer.
Now, before we get to a couple of excerpts, I have to say something here about law enforcement. You would think that after decades and probably centuries of our current government, that law enforcement would have laws against corruption, enabling the law enforcement to be able to fight corruption. And arguments can be made that they don't have proof, which, later on in this segment, I will share a personal story of mine. So I'm not going to go through the entire committee debates. I'm just going to show you what happened this week. I apologize if it's a little bit long, but it is all relevant and very important to grasp what is going on. So here are the clips.
So these liberal hand-picked appointees of the Prime Minister, from the chair on, got themselves into a position to benefit their own companies. So how did they do that, and what were their conflicts? Every transaction, every bit of money approved by the billion-dollar green slush fund, every single dollar, had to be approved by the board of directors. And the way the system worked was that beforehand, they would send out a note of what transactions were on the board, and directors would declare a conflict. So at the beginning of every board meeting, they'd say, here's the list of transactions we're considering. Here's the list of which directors are conflicted with which companies. So now let's go to work. And in some cases, the director would stay in the room, according to the minutes, while they were voting on their own project. In other cases, the director would get up and leave the room while they voted on it, and then that director would come back into the room, and the next director would get out of the room for their project. A nice little tidy conspiracy of conflict of interest to enrich themselves.
So as you can see, this week there was a ruling of the House saying that time and time again the government has not conformed to producing documents. And why is that? Well, one can guess that it's because they are hiding some information that could make them look bad. Not only look bad, but that are probably criminal in nature. Now there's a lot of talk about ethical violations. This goes way beyond that. The billion-dollar green slush fund is called $1 billion not for nothing. Again, how is it possible that there are no charges laid? One can argue that they need proof and the government is not providing proof. Another argument could be made that maybe there is two-tier justice system, one for the rich elites, politicians, etc., and one for the common folks. I am just disgusted by what is going on in here. Let's continue to watch.
One director in particular was particularly aggressive at this. Appointed in 2016 by the Prime Minister, her name's Andrée-Lise Méthode. She runs a venture capital firm called Cycle Capital and Green Technology. And Andrée-Lise Méthode, her companies, before and during her time on the board, received $250 million. That one director, her companies received $250 million in grants from SDTC. Now, some of that was before, and I'll talk about that before in a minute, but while she was on the board, 114 million went to companies, green companies that she had invested in. And during her time on the board, the value of her company, Cycle Capital, tripled. Because getting an SDTC grant is a stamp of Government of Canada approval, which allowed those companies to raise other funds. You'll never guess who her lobbyist was. Any guesses? Any guesses who her lobbyist was? Her in-house paid lobbyist for 10 years before he was elected?
I'm sorry to use a French expression here, but c'est de la magouille, also known as shenanigans. And to learn that there are currently 2 sitting cabinet ministers involved in this, Champagne and Guilbeault, not to mention that the office of the Prime Minister, if not the Prime Minister himself, appointed these people. This goes to the top of our government, folks. Why are people voting to keep these people in power is beyond me. This is the kind of stuff that you hear from countries far away that are run like by cartels and whatnot, where you expect corruption at this level. I've never had a problem with a politician skimming 10% off the top. But a case would be made that here, skimming 500%, 800%, 1,000% over the top is not only unethical, it's downright criminal. And this has been going on for a decade, and to this day, no charges laid. I'm just wondering, why is that? Why hasn't law enforcement done anything in this?
the current radical Minister of the Environment.
Wow.
While he was lobbying for Cycle Capital, the current radical Minister of the Environment got $111 million. And not only that, that minister lobbied, according to the Lobbyist Registration Act, lobbied the Prime Minister's office and the Industry Department 25 times. 25 times in the year before he was elected. And guess what? For all his hard work, he owns shares in Cycle Capital, and he still owns those shares. He's not answered how much the value of those shares have gone up since they've been granted and since that company got this kind of support.
Those are huge numbers, folks. Just think about it. This eclipses any other scandal in Canadian history. Like, is there a Canadian that wouldn't raise their hands now and say, yeah, I would like to be part of the insiders? Like, what is going on, folks? And if you've been wondering why I've been putting out videos this week about the bloc supporting the non-confidence motion tabled by the official opposition, and also why the NPD are supporting this government, I mean, there's a lot of wheels here that are getting greased that we are not aware of. I'm not only disgusted, but the more I watch this, the more I'm revolted. This kind of stuff just wants to make me vomit. But let's go on here.
If that wasn't bad enough, this particular director in 2022 left and went to the Canada Infrastructure Bank Board. And what's the first thing that she did at the Canada Infrastructure Bank Board? Voted $170 million of infrastructure bank money for a company owned by the chair of the Green Slush Fund, Annette Verschuren. Now, Annette Verschuren also sought $6 million for the Verschuren Centre at Cape Breton Centre, at the Verschuren Centre at Cape Breton University, because it was failing. SDTC said no when it went through the process. This is a conflict. But in emails, they said, we will help you find money from other government departments. And pretty soon after that, her company got the Verschuren Centre got about $10 million, $12 million from ACOA and ISED. And her other companies got $50 million from Natural Resources Canada. And then, of course, there's the Infrastructure Bank one. This is the story that we see. 9 directors, according to the Auditor General, made up those 186 conflicts. Now, that's why the CFO of the Industry Department, when the whistleblower called on him, said, and sat down with him, said, this is way bigger than the Chrétien government sponsorship scandal, which was $42 million of taxpayer money going to advertising agencies and friends of the Liberal Party. Way bigger. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So why we're asking for the documents is every time we have a witness at committee, every time we ask a question, new information comes out. The government has opposed us at every step of the way of getting those documents, and we know why. Just the scratch of the surface by the Auditor General, which is a small part, is $390 million to Liberal insiders. That's what they're trying to hide. That's why they're opposing this production order to be turned over to the RCMP. That's why the Prime Minister's personal department, the PCO, defied the order of this House to produce these documents and ordered departments to redact all the sensitive information out. And surprisingly, they used a lot of black ink when they put those things in.
We have never seen anything of this scale ever in Canada. This is a powder cake. The more people that are made aware of this situation can make an informed decision. After almost a decade of the Liberals being in power and getting scandal after scandal after scandal, no charges are laid. I have lost all faith of any law enforcement at any level. This SDTC scandal is crazy, folks. But that's just my opinion. Let me know yours in the comments down below. Looking forward to reading them. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe.